Hey y'all, Mad Queen Costumes here. So when I posted the picture the other day of the bias tape that I made, there was a lot of interest on here and through my personal page, and my cat is now meowing at me, to do a video on how to make the bias tape as well as how to apply it to your project. So I'm going to do two videos. The first one is going to be on how to make the bias tape, cutting your own strips and then using this little tool to make the tape, and then the second video is going to be on how to actually apply it to your seams or whatever project you're working on. So here we go. Okay, so to start, what you'll want is you'll want to buy this bias tape maker. It comes in a couple different sizes. I like using 1/2 inch double folded bias tape, so I got the 1 inch bias tape. It'll make it look like this, and then you would just iron it in half like that and you have the double fold. You'll find these in the quilting section. They're about $8 a piece. I got mine at Joann's and I used a half off coupon, so it was like $4. So here's just an example of pre-made bias tape. You can get them in single fold and you can get them in double fold. I normally use double fold. Like I said, this is the one, it's like this. This is what the bias tape maker makes, and then you iron it in half, and this is really good for closing off seams if you want to do a Hong Kong stitch or binding, you know, the raw edges of a hem or armhole facings. This is a single fold bias tape. I use these a lot less. In fact, I had to dig through and see if I even had an example on hand. I use this mostly if I need to sew a stripe onto something. So we won't be going over this one today. Like I said, it's not as nice in my opinion as using these to bind the seams. So I'm going to put that one away. So here's an example of, this is the finished project of the bias tape that I made before. So this, along the edge, this was the bias tape I made and put it onto a vest. And there's, you know, a lovely picture of my cat jumping up on all my projects. You'll want either a pair of scissors or a rotary cutter, and then a ruler. If you have a big see-through quilting ruler like this, come on, Nikki. It's going to be best for cutting the bias tape, and we will go from there. Okay, so one other tool that I forgot to mention is you will need an iron to do this. It's really important to keep the shape of the bias tape. As far as the piece of fabric that you'll want to start with, you'll want a square. I'm using an 18 inch by 18 inch square. You can really use any size you want. I don't need a whole lot of bias tape for this particular project, and this will make plenty. I'm making a jacket, and I am using the bias tape to bind off the edges and to Hong Kong stitch the seams. If you don't know what a Hong Kong stitch is, it's a way of finishing off an internal seam. Instead of using a serger, you can use bias tape to finish off the seam. You can use bias tape that looks the same, or you can use like a contrasting bias tape to kind of give it an interesting look inside. I'm just going to stick with the same color that is for my jacket. And what you'll want to do is have your square. I actually have two layers here, so I've got two 18 by 18 inch squares, and you're going to want to fold it in half crosswise so that you make or diagonally so that you make a triangle. And this is why it's really important that your square be as perfect as possible. And I'm sorry the camera's kind of shaky. I'm doing this on my phone. I don't actually have a real camera, and it's kind of hard to do this by myself. But we will make the best of it here. So you'll do this. Looks like a little handkerchief now. And since I want to use the 1 inch bias tape maker, you'll want to make sure your strips are 2 inches. because as we feed it through this, it's going to cut it in half pretty much. So you'll want to take your ruler. The easiest way I find to do this is on the fold. I'm going to want to just cut an inch because it's folded. It'll be 2 inches once I unfold it. I use this. This is why I really like the rotary cutter, because it makes making bias tape so much easier. So you'll put this on the fold. You'll do an inch here with the rotary cutter, and then once you unfold, that'll be 2 inches, and then from that point you would do a 2 inch, 2 inch, 2 inch, 2 inch until you get to the top. And since I am doing this by myself and I have to hold my phone to do this, I'm going to cut those real quick, and then I will come back and show you what the next step is. Ta-da! So this is what your strips look all cut out. So here is this was the one that was on the fold, and I've already cut off the edges of this one. What you'll want to do, which I find the easiest way to put the bias tape together, and it makes it a lot smoother than trying to match up all these seams here with the diagonals. Also, if you have a fabric that has a pattern on one side or isn't really interchangeable right or wrong side, this is going to be the best way to do it too. So you'll cut off these diagonals so that you'll have 90-degree edges like this. And then as we put it together, I'll just take this strip since it's already squared off here, and you will lay it like this at a 90-degree angle. And what you'll do is sew from corner to corner here, and then we'll cut off this excess here. And that way when we fold this over, it'll have that diagonal seam in there that you would normally see if you pre-bought bias tape. And again, I'm going to do this off camera real quick. Unfortunately, I wish I had a way that I could set this up so you guys could watch me do it. But for now, let me do that real quick and we'll get back into it. Okay, so I've got it in the sewing machine here. I'm going to see if I can try and do this sort of one-handed to show you guys. So it's 90-degree angle here, perpendicular from each other, and then we're going to go from corner to corner here. I like to do just a little bit of a back stitch at the beginning and a little bit of back stitch at the end so that when you're making the bias tape it doesn't come unraveled or anything. So let's go ahead, and this camera angle is probably going to look super awkward for a moment while I do my back stitch and whatnot. So here we go. And I am just using a regular straight stitch for this. Nothing special. And then let's take this out here. And so now, when I open it like this, I've got that diagonal seam. This particular fabric doesn't really want to stay down by itself, so in this case I'm going to iron this real quick so that it stays down for when I feed it through the bias tape maker. But you're also going to want to either rotary cut this off or just snip it off. I don't know if I can do this part one-handed. Normally I would drag my sister in here to help me, but she is gone for the weekend. So we're doing this all by ourselves. There we go. Okay, so you'll want to have that, and then you'll press this down. So you just continue doing that for each piece of your strip. I'm going to go ahead and get all my strips put together before I feed it through the bias tape maker. And yeah, I also realized, and I will put this in my description of materials that are needed, but it's really good to have this cutting board too. It's one of those things that I use for everything, so I kind of forget that it's, another material that you should have with you. Like I said, rotary cutter is my best friend. I no longer pin patterns and use scissors to cut them. I use patterning weights and use the rotary cutter. So it is kind of a lifesaver. And then obviously, one thing I forgot to mention is you do need your sewing machine, kind of important. So sorry about the out of order thing. This is the first time I've done this tutorial, so it's probably going to be way longer than I anticipated, and mildly all over the place. I will get better at it. So I'm going to go ahead and put all my bias tape together, we'll iron it, and make the tape itself. Okay, so I've got my bias tape, all my seams are sewn together, and the seam allowance is, I cut off all the extra and press the seams. This particular fabric I'm using doesn't hold a seam, the iron pressing it down quite as well as the other fabric I use for the bias tape. For your first time, I would definitely recommend using a cotton. I used linen, was what the yellow one was, and that one worked pretty well too if you use a nice high heat. But for this one, it's like a stretch suiting. It's probably not the best for the bias tape, but if you're like me and you're like, I must have this fabric as my bias tape, I will suffer through it. So now you're going to want your handy dandy little bias tape maker. It comes like this. You'll just pull this open, and this will be what you'll use to drag the tape through. You'll want to make sure that you leave one diagonal end. It's easier to feed through the bias tape maker. And you'll want to make sure that when you feed it through, your seam, the right side of your seam needs to be facing down, so that when it folds through the bias tape maker, it folds it in like this, so it keeps your raw edge inside. So what you'll want to do is take this edge and feed it through the bias tape maker. Let's see if I can do this with one hand. One second here. Okay. That might work. Nope, out of focus. Out of focus. Come on. There we go. So you'll take this and shove it through until you get this at the end. And as you'll see, if I don't have my finger in front of the lens, as I'm pulling it through, it makes that shape. But obviously if I keep pulling, it's just going to unravel itself. So at this point, this is when you would take your iron, and normally when you press anything, you want to use a presser cloth on the machine, or I'm sorry, on the ironing board and on the fabric. I seem to have misplaced my thing that I have to lay over my gross, dirty ironing board in my PAX mess behind me. And for the sake of you guys being able to see what I'm doing, I'm not going to use a presser cloth on top. And it'll probably make a little bit of a difference with this fabric, but if you were using a cotton, it wouldn't be the end of the world to not use a presser foot. So let me see if I can somehow set this up so you guys can see what I'm doing. So first you're going to want to press that down. Depending on what kind of fabric you are using is going to depend on how much pressure you need to put and how long you need to have it on there. So as I did that, now you can see it's got that fold that we were looking for when I showed you the examples. So what will happen now then is, as I pull, this will be so much easier with the second person, I'm sorry guys. I'm going to hold this here, and as I pull it, let's see if I can do this. My phone doesn't want to focus. It's too close, it doesn't like it. Okay, that's not going to work. So as I pull this, it's going to make that, and I'm going to just keep ironing as I go. You really only want to have an inch or two out at a time, or else you're going to get an uneven sides when you press it. What I like to do, which I can't really do on the video right now because I've only got 2 hands, if I had 3 this would be magical, is as I pull this, I will actually follow my iron along with it. So I'm going to do that real quick, and then I will show you, we'll just fold it over one more time to do the double fold. So I will be right back after I do that. Okay, so we've got it ironed, it's gone through the bias tape maker. So at this point you have a single fold bias. This is what I would use if I needed like a strip of something on, say, like a Sailor Fuku or something. But for what I'm using, since I'm going to be binding off the seams, I actually want a double fold, and at this point all you would do is fold this over and iron this like this, and then you have a double fold. How you iron it over is going to depend on how you want to attach your bias tape. For this particular one, when I stitch it, there's going to be a top stitch on here, so I can just fold it directly in half. If you want to put the bias tape on and stitch in the ditch, which would mean that on the right side there'd be no top stitch on here, you would want to fold it so that you've got a little bit of an edge like that. Because as you would put this on your front, and then this would go through the back. I'll kind of go over this a little bit more when we get to attaching it. But like I said, you'll want to leave a little bit of a piece on when you iron it over if you're going to stitch in the ditch. If you're going to do like I am and just do top stitch, you can just do it directly in half. It's not really going to be a big deal. When you buy bias tape, the pre-made double fold bias tape will have that little piece right there. It's meant to stitch in the ditch. I am just using a top stitch because that is a detail that I want on the jacket that I'm making. So it's kind of up to you. There's multiple ways to put on bias tape. I'm just going to show you the way that I do it. And so I'm going to go ahead and iron this down, and then in part 2 of the video I will go over how to attach it to the project so that it turns out like this yellow one here. This is the vest I made. So this is the top stitching. If I were to stitch in the ditch, the stitch would go right along this edge here. And if I fold it over, you'll see this part has stitching through it as well, and it just kind of finishes off the seam. This particular vest is lined, so I didn't Hong Kong stitch the middle. So the bias tape I used on this is just on the outside and on the armhole facings. On the jacket it'll be on the outside and the seams inside, because my jacket isn't going to be lined. Normally I would line a jacket, but I'm going to be having so many layers in this costume, I'm kind of cutting out the lining on the jacket just so I don't overheat during packs. So look out for part 2, and we'll attach the bias tape.